Welcome back to Pragmatic Optimists. We're here today to talk a little bit more about the active optimism you can engage in related to access to abortion and reproductive health care. So I'm Rachel Cohen. I'm joined by my co-host, State Senator Tiara Mack. And today our special guest is Erika, who is an organizing program manager at the Lilith Fund. I'm going to go ahead and let Tiara introduce her a little bit more. But we are circling back to the kind of defunding of Planned Parenthood and access to abortion care that we've seen come out of not just the Supreme Court, but also Congress and the president over this session, and really hope to give you the tools through today's conversation to plug in to help people who are seeking access to reproductive health care.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and I'm glad to follow up on one of our previous episodes and to also welcome a fellow abortion funder and someone working in this space. Erika, we met a few years ago through the National Network of Abortion Funds, community building events and conference. Since the fall of Roe, there have been some promising developments, especially in states along the East Coast and the West Coast, and a few states in the middle of the country that have introduced shield laws. 22 states have introduced shield laws to protect access to abortion, which is essential health care. But in that same vein, there have also been 12 states that have introduced total bans. And Lilith Fund is based in Texas. I would love to learn a little bit more about the impact of the role of abortion funds and the impact of the fall of Roe in the last few years on your work specifically in Texas.
Yeah, thanks. So we know that before even Dobbs was overturned, we had SB 8 in Texas, which was the 6-week abortion ban. And so that was really devastating to access in Texas because it meant that basically abortion was virtually banned. And so really since then, and since I've been at Lilith Fund, there's been like several abortion bans that we've worked through. There was right before SB 8 was also the COVID ban, which is when our Attorney General also took advantage of a pandemic to ban abortion temporarily in Texas. And so we had like a brief preview of what now Dobbs, the reality has been, and which it's meant that like we have had to be very wily on our feet and quickly, pivot to helping people leave the state, or rather just like letting them know that they can leave the state and then being able to fund them when they do. Because we know that like even now, abortions just become more expensive. And that's really like where we live, right? We live on the intersection of abortion access and economic justice, because we know that just because we believe that people deserve access to abortion doesn't mean that they automatically get it. They still need to be able to access that. And in a country where all healthcare is expensive, abortion, especially because of the stigma, is even more expensive, because in Texas, we even have laws where your insurance can't cover abortion. There's coverage bans. And so since Dobbs, we have just seen that like the need has just gone up. Just because an abortion ban is in effect doesn't mean that like the need goes away, and actually it gets even more crucial. And so what we've had to do is, besides being able to increase our funding, which we've been able somehow to do, is to actually increase the amount of money that we're able to give to folks who call us, is also help them navigate all of the field of misinformation and, the fear that abortion bans put into people. Because even though in Texas, we have these laws, there's this chilling effect that we have seen with SB 8, with the trigger ban that went into effect after Dobbs was overturned, which is that people get scared. People are unsure of what is happening. And when you're pregnant and you're scared and there's time, the clock, right, that we know that goes, that like makes abortion access even harder and more expensive as time goes on and as people get more pregnant. We're just trying to be there to let them know what their options are and to let them know like where they can go. And so that's, since Dobbs, we opened up a pregnancy helpline. So anybody can call that or text us there. just even if they don't want to need an abortion, just want answers, we're there to like answer them. And so we have a doula on staff who's able to help them with that. We've just had to become creative in that way and think about what is it like the fields of questions that folks might have and try to answer those for them, ahead of time. We also host a website, needabortion.org, that is supposed to be a, one-stop shop of resources for people who might need abortion. Because again, we know that there's just so much misinformation, so much confusion, and we're just trying to be a little bit of a illumination or safe harbor for folks to understand their rights and understand what it is that they can do.
So if you have someone, I think I have two kind of threads that I'd love to let you answer. The first is if you have someone that's calling in a state like Texas and asking what kind of options they have or where they can look for resources, where do you direct them beyond needabortion.org? And if you have people, particularly from out of state, from blue states, that are looking to support people in states with total or near total abortion bans, what would you recommend that they do, particularly as an abortion funder?
Yeah, so those are great questions. I think what we do firsthand is, or what we started to do is, there was a period when SB 8 went into effect where we just couldn't fund anything because we had no clarity of what the courts could allow us to do. So while we were doing that, we pivoted and started doing like funding reproductive health care. And so we partnered with the clinics that were still in Texas that were still open. And we're able to fund things like sonograms, things like screenings. And so that meant that like even people going and just finding out that they were pregnant in clinics that were still open, we were able to fund some of that. And then from there, they really got navigated from those clinics to where they can go outside of the state to get care. And then that's also when we partnered with clinics outside of the state. So in states like New Mexico, Kansas, Colorado, really where we're seeing Texans going, we partnered with those clinics. And so once Texans get there and, clinic staff understand that they're from Texas, they know to connect them to Lilith Fund, so that we, again, can kind of send them, make sure that they have vouchers to be able to fund their care. So really, we're just trying to communicate with clinic staff like, hey, we exist, we're here, form partnerships with them so that they know that like we are a resource if and when they're seeing Texans, which they do. And they see a lot of Texans. And so they kind of know that. We also started programs like our PAC program, or our post-abortion care kit program, which is sending packages to these clinics that partner with us. And these, kits have things like emergency contraception and a zine that has information for them about like their post-abortion care. And then also a gift card for $200 because we know that this is expensive. And even just getting back to the state, having to leave the state, the fact that so many of our clients, this is the first time they're leaving their hometown, they're leaving their state, this is the first time they're traveling. We are just trying to, again, help offset that cost because it's a huge cost. It's a huge burden to have to leave your hometown for care. Beyond that, we operate off of grassroots donations. And so that's literally how our hotline is run. So every year we have a fundraiser fundathon through the National Network of Abortion Funds. And that's really where we see our supporters really come together and they can raise money for us essentially. And it's a really great opportunity for folks to get in communication and talk to their community networks about just what the reality of abortion access is. And so that's honestly what I tell folks who are not in Texas. Like if they want to help, it's like, well, you can help us by having these conversations with your folks about like what the reality of abortion access is, especially in states where abortion is banned. And you can help us by like raising money or just like becoming a sustaining donor. Even just like knowing that we have $5 coming in every month from one person is able to get us to like build out our budget for the month. So it's just things like that. Things knowing that like even though you're not necessarily in the state of Texas, but there's Texans that you might care about. We have a lot of donors who are texpats who used to live in Texas and no longer do. And so we let them know that, like, just because abortion is banned in Texas, that doesn't mean that the need goes away, and actually Texans need your help more. And so if you have disposable income, or if you have a network of people who know that you can get organized and can help raise money for folks in Texas, like, that's always super helpful. And just like not turning your back on southern states. There seems to be the sentiment that, like, people in the South voted for this, and so therefore we deserve what's happening. And really, that is just such a sad and, like, negative outlook on having of folks who are in the South, because frankly, folks in the South have had to deal with a lot of these laws that are coming federally for a much longer time, and we've had to be creative for such a long time, and we just need solidarity from folks who are not in these states. And so that's one way that folks can help us, is just by, like, you know, knowing that, like, even though these laws are in place, it's not because we actually voted for them. It's because we have a lot of repression in our states and things built up to create these things. And the folks that are being affected are low income folks from the South, people of color from the South. And so we need your solidarity. We don't need any sort of finger wagging of, like, we deserve this, because nobody deserves this ever.
I think that there's such an important reminder there. There's two quick plugs I want to make, and then I want to turn it back to Tiara because she has more direct experience with abortion funding than I do. The first is that I think it's really important that we all remember that you cannot be anti-fascist or anti-authoritarian if you are rooting for the impacts of fascism to hit a group of people that you think are deserving of them. That is in and of itself a fascist worldview, and one that we need to reject entirely. And I'm so glad that you named it. And I'm sure that our listeners are really rooting for the people of Texas to not be impacted by this fascism and authoritarianism. But if you are someone who's listening and finds yourself thinking that people, deserve what they've gotten, I think that it's really important to remember that these states are gerrymandered to hell, and also that there are deliberate, algorithmic, and mainstream media, even disinformation campaigns aimed at people, let alone the large percentage of people in these states that do vote blue. So that's number one. Thank you so much for raising that. And number two is I do just want to plug recurring donations to National Network of Abortion Funds. And if you make one of, I think it's at least $20 to $25 per month, they will send you gear every year. This is 2 years ago. It wasn't a crop top. I made it one. Nobody yell at me about how I shouldn't be wearing a crop top on this. Somebody did that last time that I wore one. And this year it was a hat. So if you are treat motivated, there's another reason to donate to NNAF and to make it a recurring donation. It should be enough just to know that that's how organizations build out their budgets, but also you get some pro-abortion swag. And I think that's a pretty good segue to the next couple of things, Tiara, that you had to ask.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I think as someone who has also I was raised in the geographic South, in Georgia and South Carolina, I think a common reminder that, especially now living in a blue bubble, that people need to realize is that there are queer people in the South. There are people who are seeking abortion in the South. There are Black people. There are trans people. There are robust communities that existed before the U.S. empire. There are communities of Indigenous folks who all call the South home and has been their ancestral lands for many generations. And I think in this conversation, Erika, I would love to hear a little bit more about what support looks like in Texas for abortion. Abortion is at an all-time high, according to Pew. 63% of the country has approval or is in favor of abortion. So what does the support look like tangibly on the ground when you have events or when you're talking about donors? You mentioned some people who are texpaths who left the state, but I assume that there's still a robust community and network of people who live in the state of Texas who are third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation Texans who are committed to making sure that your state has the resources in order to eventually realize a future where reproductive access, economic justice is a core tenet of the reality of all Texans.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think that's currently when I see when we have events, when we are tabling even and just talking to folks about like, hey, we're Lilith Fund, we exist. Regular people who don't necessarily live or swim in this the way we do will just come up to us and just be like, hell yeah, I'm so glad you exist. Here's money. Or here's my email. I want to get involved. And so people are so enthusiastic about wanting to learn more, wanting to know what their rights are, wanting to know how they can tangibly get involved. And so we have things like our PAC programming, which I mentioned, right, where we have a huge need to have like physical support because we're literally trying to move like hundreds of boxes and hundreds of supplies in like a weekend. And we will have volunteers who will just come out of the woodwork, who will help us literally finish creating these packs in literal hours. And so, this last year, we do it annually, and I always am shocked because beforehand, when we like are organizing this, there's a little bit of anxiety, right? Where we're like, oh my God, how are we going to get this done? How are we going to get 800 kits finished and then shipped across the state, out of the state? And our volunteers always come through in that, like, they come out and they help us finish these packs in like mere hours, organize themselves. And then are like constantly like, hey, how else can we help? Also, when we have legislative session years, we just had a legislative session year, and we know that like we can talk to our supporters and we can talk to them about bills like Rosie's Law, which we tried to pass. And Rosie's Law is basically would make state Medicaid cover abortion. It sounds like a pie in the sky dream, but when we talk to Texans, they're like, yeah, of course, we want our tax dollars to be able to fund abortion. And people say that, and it sounds like a radical thing to some of our opponents, but frankly, like, we know that like our tax dollars go to some horrible things, and our supporters know this, but they also know that like it doesn't have to be that way. And there's actual bills and tangible bills, lawmakers who want to make this a reality. And so they provide that support. There's also just like, again, the fact that we saw a near total abortion ban and then saw people do what we call rage donations, to the point that we were able to increase our funding for people is so encouraging, because it means that like people literally put their money where their mouth is and go, actually, this is horrible. An abortion ban is horrible, and we're going to fund abortion harder, is what the joke that we like to make. That like people just get more stubborn. There's nobody more stubborn than people in the South, because we literally know that like actually you can try as much as you want, but we're going to keep existing and we're going to do things more creatively. And so then we also see things like our city council members. I live in San Antonio. And so a couple of years ago, we were able to pass what we call the Reproductive Justice Fund. And so it was local city lawmakers deciding that, you know what, we have an ability, even though we have state laws in effect, we can still put city tax dollars and fund abortion logistical support, because that's not illegal yet. And so they did that in the time before this year, which is when finally a preemption was passed. But before that, the city of Austin had also had an abortion logistical support fund for the city. And so we just know that like local lawmakers, state lawmakers, there's folks who are stubborn and who get creative as hell. And we are so, grateful for them, because it just shows that like, even though there's a state ban, people know it's unjust, and people are thinking and sitting there and trying to figure out how we can move around these things and how we can create, the reality that we want, which is that like everybody deserves access to health care, and that includes abortion care.
I love that message, Erika. Abortion funding is mutual aid. And it's just so beautiful to be reminded that our collective action is rooted in this idea that a better world is possible. And that even in a place like Texas, that most of the country will write off as a banned state, they have local action and people who are digging their heels in and saying, we will provide access to care, even if we are a banned state. And that's what gives me, and I hope other Praggies, the optimism that we need in order to build the world that we see. And I'd love to close out with asking asking, what keeps you optimistic amid this work? There's so many things that bring tears to my eyes, and there's so many ways that I see community band together that keeps me hopeful and that keeps me rooted in this fight. But what keeps you optimistic?
Fellow abortion funders keep me optimistic. Just regular people who donate $5, $10 keeps me optimistic. People who come up to our table and say thank you for doing the work and sign up for our email list or just ask like, what can we do? That keeps me optimistic because sometimes I do find myself getting very cynical, especially like legislative years like this. It'll just, knock the wind out of me. But thankfully, there's so many people who know that everybody deserves access to abortion and that they're going to do whatever they can to make that a reality. And so people will hit us up and be like, hey, I have, my small business and we're going to give 10% of our sales to y'all for this month. And just things like that folks get so creative and kind of find their niche and then figure out how that niche can adapt to how to help support abortion access. That keeps me so optimistic because it reminds me that like even folks who are, this isn't their job, this is, they're just regular Texans, but they can understand basically like, oh, you know what? I do have a role in this, even though the role might seem tiny or minuscule. It's not, because all of it together means that like we're able to fund that many more people who call us. And so that's always going to keep me optimistic. Our supporters are always going to keep me optimistic. People outside of Texas who let us know, like, thank you for doing that work. It always kind of helps me, like, even on like the days where I'm like really upset because some of these lawmakers really make our job difficult. It's just regular people who know that like, actually it's those folks who are using institutions against us and they're bunk, but we're not. And we're just going to keep trying to figure out how to, keep showing up for Texans and each other. Cause really we're all we got.
I can't think of anything that leaves me more optimistic than hearing from people like you, Erika. Thank you so much for joining us. As a reminder, our listeners can find Erika and her work at the Lilith Fund. You can also check out National Network of Abortion Funds. Those links should be in the description. And keep following, subscribing, interacting with everything here on Legal AF. Tiara and I are very happy to be joining you as Pragmatic Optimists. You can find us on individual social media at Mack District 6, number 6, and Cohen.489. We'll see you soon.
Bye, Praggies.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.